Well, we met at a party, and Earl overheard me saying that I had been divorced.
And I said, so, you in the club.
That is exactly the way he said it.
When she was doing Waiting to Exhale, she was with Gregory Hines, and that character, she was like flirting back and forth. She began a relationship with him. But he told her that she needed to lose weight in order to make it to the next threshold of her career.
In 1981, a young woman from Acres Homes stood under Broadway lights, sweating through workshops where she improvised lines that would end up in one of the biggest musicals of the decade, Dreamgirls. And for years after, she'd call herself the Invisible Dream, the one folks clapped for but never really saw. Loretta Devine carried Black womanhood from those stages to the big screen, turning a plus-size single mama named Gloria into the heart of Waiting to Exhale, a woman who got to be desirable, funny, and whole without Hollywood demanding she shrink first. She won an Emmy, stacked up Image Awards, and became everybody's mama on TV. But the machine never gave her the flowers, never put her face on the poster next to the younger, thinner women who got to play the leads she helped build. By the time the Dreamgirls movie came around, the original Dreamgirls were too old for the Hollywood gaze, and Loretta was left holding a legacy the industry still calls supporting. This is the story of the woman who made Fat Black Beauty visible, who survived the sting of being overlooked, and who kept working anyway, because sometimes the greatest act of rebellion is refusing to disappear. But every act of rebellion starts somewhere quieter, somewhere most folks never think to look. For Loretta Devine, it started in Acres Homes, a working-class Black neighborhood on Houston's North Side, where the heat stuck to your skin like a second layer, and the church was never far from anything that mattered. Born August 21, 1949, she was raised by her mother, Eunice Tolliver, in a single-parent household where making it meant hustling harder than anyone around you and believing in something bigger than what you could see. Her mama worked, her siblings pushed, and somewhere in the middle of all that survival, young Loretta found a stage. It was the gym at George Washington Carver High School where she first felt it, that electric hum when a room full of people goes quiet because you've got them. Talent shows, pep rallies, any excuse to stand in front of a mic and let her voice fill the space. She took it. The squeak of sneakers on the basketball court, the smell of popcorn and hair grease mixing in the air, the way the crowd would erupt mid-song like they'd been holding their breath just waiting for her to give them permission to let go. Performance wasn't just something she did, it was her way out, and she knew it even then. So she studied, disciplined herself, turned talent into craft. Bachelor of Arts in Speech and Drama from the University of Houston in 1971, then a Master of Fine Arts in Theater from Brandeis University in 1976. The kind of formal training that separated dreamers from professionals and gave her the vocabulary to translate what she felt into what audiences needed to see. She wasn't just talented anymore, she was trained, ready, armed with degrees her mama's work ethic had made possible. By 1978, she made it to Broadway, landing her first credit in a show called A Broadway Musical. It closed after one performance, a brutal welcome to the business where dreams die before opening night. But she was in the room now, and that mattered more than the failure. Broadway back then wasn't handing out chances to plus-size Black women from Houston, unless you proved you could hold the stage tighter than anyone they'd ever seen. Loretta held it. She kept auditioning, kept showing up, kept refining what her education and instinct had built. The Promised Land wasn't gentle, but she was tougher, and by 1981, she was ready for what came next, even if she didn't know the cost yet. The dream had a name: Dreamgirls. Loretta walked into workshops that would stretch for months, where the script wasn't finished and the characters weren't fully written, where three Black women, Loretta, Cheryl Lee Ralph, and Jennifer Holliday, were expected to improvise their way into a story loosely based on the Supremes and make it feel like lived truth. She was cast as Laurel Robinson, the quiet one, the one who loved too hard and stayed too long. And in those cramped rehearsal spaces, she pulled lines from her own terror and exhilaration, from the ache of wanting to be seen and the fear of never being enough. The workshops were brutal and beautiful, the kind of creative laboratory where you either found your character or got swallowed whole. Loretta found Laurel. She built her line by improvised line, gesture by gesture, until the woman on that stage felt as real as anyone she'd ever known. But even as the show came together, even as the music soared and the story clicked, and Dreamgirls opened to the kind of buzz that makes careers, there was a hierarchy forming that she couldn't control. Jennifer Holliday's Effie White was the showstopper, the voice that brought audiences to their feet, the Tony Award magnet. Cheryl Lee Ralph's Dina Jones was the beauty, the one the fictional producers chose to front the group. And Loretta? She was Laurel, the invisible dream, the one critics praised but never quite centered, the one who held the emotional backbone of the show while the spotlight found everyone else first. She felt it even then. Years later, she'd admit she called herself the invisible dream for a long time, that she had to make up her own affirmation songs just to walk into those rooms with her head up, something like, "I am Loretta Devine," a mantra to remind herself she belonged there even when the industry kept whispering she didn't. Dreamgirls became a Broadway smash, the kind of cultural moment that changes everything for everyone involved, but the credit didn't land equally. Loretta got work after that, steady Broadway gigs in shows like Comin' Uptown and Bob Fosse's Big Deal, roles that kept her employed and respected in theater circles. But famous? A household name? That wasn't the card she'd been dealt. Being in the room, she learned, wasn't the same as being seen, but it was something, and she'd make it count. Hollywood would come calling eventually, but not before it tried to tell her who she needed to be. By the late 1980s and early 90s, Loretta was picking up TV work, guest spots, and recurring roles that introduced her to living rooms across America. She landed on A Different World as Stevie Rallen, the dorm director who kept the chaos in check, and the audition itself became one of those full-circle moments she'd tell later. How she was in London performing in the Colored Museum when the call came. How she flew back to LA for that final callback and brought her mama with her to see what they'd built together from Acres Homes. There were roles in rock, bit parts in films like Boomerang, the steady grind of a working actress who was good enough to keep booking, but not thin enough, not young enough, not whatever, enough to be the lead. Because somewhere in those audition rooms and studio lot meetings, the whispers started, the kind Hollywood pretends aren't policy, but absolutely are. If she wanted bigger roles, she'd need to lose weight. They didn't say it with malice, just with the casual certainty of an industry that had spent decades equating thinness with worthiness, that looked at a plus-size black woman and saw character actor instead of star. Loretta heard it, and she decided, quietly but definitively, that she wasn't interested in shrinking herself to fit their frame. Then came December 1995, and everything shifted. Waiting to Exhale hit theaters like a cultural earthquake. 4 black women navigating love, betrayal, friendship, and survival, with a babyface-produced soundtrack that soundtracked a generation and a cast that included Whitney Houston, Angela Bassett, Layla Roshan, and Loretta Devine as Gloria Matthews. Gloria was a hairstylist, a single mother, a woman who'd been used and overlooked, and in Loretta's hands, she became something Hollywood almost never let plus-size black women be. Desirable, funny, whole, romantic, and unapologetically herself. There was no weight loss montage, no moment where Gloria had to transform her body to deserve love. Just Gregory Hines leaning into her space with heat and tenderness. Just a woman who looked like so many women in the audience, finally getting to be the one whose story mattered. The film became a phenomenon, the kind of box office success and cultural moment that proved black women's stories could pack theaters, and Loretta walked away with an NAACP Image Award for Outstanding Supporting Actress in a Motion Picture. Body positivity writers and Black feminist critics would spend years pointing back to Gloria as a turning point, a rare mainstream depiction of a fat Black woman who got desire, agency, and joy without having to earn it through suffering or transformation first. Radiance magazine and later think pieces celebrated what Loretta had done, how she'd carried plus-size glamour and self-love onto a studio screen and made it look effortless. She kept that energy rolling. 1996 brought The Preacher's Wife, another Whitney Houston vehicle where Loretta held her own, opposite Denzel Washington and Gregory Hines. And another NAACP Image Award followed. She was building something real, a filmography that let her be warm and maternal when the role called for it, but also sensual, complicated, fully human. In interviews around that time, she'd lean into what she called body love, telling reporters she was very big on promoting body love, whoever you are, a quiet but clear flag planted in the ground. She wouldn't apologize for taking up space, and for a moment, it looked like Hollywood might finally make room. But Hollywood has a way of celebrating you in the moment, then filing you under supporting the second you age past their comfort zone. And that filing system is efficient, predictable, and relentless. By the late 1990s, Loretta was working, always working, but the roles started to follow a pattern she could see coming from a mile away. There was Down in the Delta in 1998, a Maya Angelou-directed family drama where she played opposite Alfre Woodard, grounded and maternal. There was Funny Valentines in 1999, more Black Southern family storytelling, more elder wisdom and warmth. The work was good, the stories mattered, but the character descriptions all started to sound the same. Mother, auntie, church lady, the moral center, the one who dispenses advice and holds the family together while everyone else gets to be messy and complicated and young. Television loved Loretta Devine in a very specific way. From 1999 to 2004, she was Marla Hendricks on Boston Public, David E. Kelley's ambitious network drama about an urban high school, playing the school secretary who kept the place running while the younger, whiter characters got the soapy storylines. At the same time, she was voicing Muriel Stubbs on the PJs, Eddie Murphy's stop-motion animated series, bringing her timing and warmth to a character who was, once again, the grounding presence in a chaotic world. The roles were steady, union scale, residuals stacking up, the kind of career sustainability most actors would kill for. But leading lady? Romantic interest? The woman whose name goes first on the poster? Those doors stayed closed. She knew what was happening. By 2016, sitting down for the Build series interview, she'd talk about it with the kind of knowing humor that comes from years of navigating the game, reflecting on how she'd been typecast, how the industry saw her as dependable, but rarely as daring. That same year, on Sway's Universe, she opened up about Black family portrayals on TV, how she wanted shows like The Carmichael Show, where she played yet another mother, to dig into real issues instead of sanitized, safe versions of Black life. She was grateful for the work, always grateful, but there was a tension there, a quiet ache between being employed and being seen. Then, in 2021, she sat down on Fox Soul's Tammy Mack show and said it out loud, laughing but landing it like the thesis statement it was. "I've played everybody's mama." The studio audience laughed with her, but the line hung in the air like a truth the industry didn't want to admit. That Hollywood had looked at Loretta Devine, a woman who could sing, act, carry drama and comedy with equal weight, and decided the only thing they really needed from her was to be the mom in the background. Typecasting sounds like a compliment until you realize it's a cage, and beloved isn't the same as centered. Then, in 2007, Shonda Rhimes handed her something different. Grey's Anatomy was already a phenomenon by the time Loretta stepped into Seattle Grace Hospital as Adele Weber, the first wife of Dr. Richard Weber, the chief of surgery played by James Pickens Jr. Starting as a recurring guest, not a series regular, it was the kind of role that could easily fade into the background of a show, with that many moving parts and that much drama. But Shonda Rhimes and her writers gave Adele something most older black women on television never got: a full interior life, a marriage stretched thin by years of sacrifice and resentment, a slow unraveling as memory loss took hold, and scenes that demanded the kind of emotional precision Loretta had been ready to deliver for decades. She played it like she'd been preparing her whole career. Different directors rotated through Grey's every week, each one with their own vision. But Loretta did what she'd learned to do back in those Dreamgirls workshops. She held on to what she'd built for Adele, protected the choices she'd made about who this woman was and what she needed. It was the same discipline Ellen Pompeo used to anchor Meredith Grey through the chaos, and Loretta brought that same steadiness to a character who was falling apart on screen. The work paid off. In 2011, for the episode This Is How We Do It, Loretta Devine won the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Guest Actress in a Drama Series. Emmy night, the weight of the statue in her hands, photographers flashing, the category announced off the main broadcast, but the validation real and heavy and decades in the making. The Television Academy later featured her in their Me and My Emmy series, where she reflected on what it meant to finally have this kind of recognition after so many years in the industry, after Broadway and Waiting to Exhale and all those mama roles that never got this kind of spotlight. A year later, she earned another Emmy nomination and won a Gracie Award, and fans who'd been watching her for years wrote essays about how heartbreaking and award-worthy her performance had always been. But even in the triumph, there was a quiet question hanging in the air. Outstanding guest actress, not lead, not even supporting in a series where she could have anchored entire seasons. The industry had finally pinned a piece of hardware to her name, but it was still in a category that reminded everyone she was visiting, not staying. That even at her most decorated, she was considered supplemental to someone else's show. The Emmy proved she could do prestige drama, but by then the industry had already decided what Loretta Devine was for, and leading ladies past 60 were not part of the plan. There was another wound that hadn't fully healed, one that went all the way back to where it started. In 2006, Dreamgirls came to the big screen, and the world lost its mind. Beyoncé as Dina, Jennifer Hudson as Effie, Annika Noni Rose as Laurel, a director with Oscars on his shelf and a marketing machine that turned the film into an event before it even premiered. The original Broadway cast, the women who'd spent months in those workshops improvising and bleeding into those roles, who'd carried the show through years of performances and made it the cultural force that justified a film adaptation in the first place. They got cameos, brief appearances, polite nods. Loretta showed up on screen for a moment, then watched from the sidelines as a new generation got the spotlight she'd helped build. It wasn't about the younger actresses, not really. Loretta would say as much later, in 2022, sitting on a couch with Jennifer Holliday for TBS's Friday Night Vibes, reminiscing about Debbie Allen and the old days and all the things they'd lived through together. The hurt wasn't personal, it was structural. The quiet truth that by the time Hollywood decided Dreamgirls was ready for the movies, the original Dreamgirls were no longer young enough, thin enough, marketable enough to be trusted with their own story. The film celebrated a legacy while erasing the women who'd made it, and the industry didn't even notice the contradiction. Years later, on Lena Waithe's Legacy Talk, Loretta would open up about what it felt like to watch that happen, to be celebrated and sidelined at the same time, to realize that the invisible dream wasn't just how she felt in the original production, but how Hollywood would always see her. The sting of being overlooked, she'd say, never fully goes away. You just learn to carry it differently. So she kept working in horror films where she played villains, in streaming shows where she played elder strippers, in any role that let her prove she was more than a memory. And somewhere in her 70s, Loretta Devine stopped asking for permission and started having the time of her life. In 2020, she showed up in Spell, a horror film where she played Ms. Eloise, a menacing hoodoo practitioner who terrorizes the protagonist with folk magic and pure malice. It was the furthest thing from Everybody's Mama, a role that let her lean into darkness and physicality, cackling and conjuring and playing evil with the kind of glee that only comes when you've spent decades being safe and dependable, and you're finally done with that. In interviews promoting the film, she talked about how much fun she'd had, how audiences might be shocked to see her that way, how liberating it felt to stop being the moral center and just be terrifying instead. Then there was P-Valley, the Stars drama set in a Mississippi strip club, where Loretta played an elder stripper and club regular, a character who existed in the margins but brought depth and texture to every scene she touched. Critics praised her for continuing to expand her range, for showing up in a space most actresses her age would never even be offered, and owning it with the same presence she'd brought to everything else. She was in her 70s, playing roles that had nothing to do with being respectable or motherly, and she was freer than she'd ever been. It wasn't just the edgy projects, though. She kept showing up in network sitcoms like The Carmichael Show, still playing moms, but now with sharper edges and more room to be messy, still anchoring Black family stories, but on her own terms. And in 2019, Netflix's Strong Black Lead dedicated a Strong Black Legends episode to her, framing her not as a footnote, but as essential to Black screen history. A woman whose body of work had shaped what was possible for everyone who came after. What changed wasn't the industry, it was Loretta. She stopped waiting for Hollywood to catch up and started choosing roles that fed her, roles that let her stretch and surprise and remind everyone that she'd never been just one thing. The freedom wasn't in finally getting the big break. It was in realizing she didn't need one anymore. And then, in 2025, a new generation finally started saying the quiet part out loud. Loretta Devine never got her flowers. The flowers came late, but they came from the people who mattered most. As Loretta celebrated her 75th and 76th birthdays, something shifted in the cultural conversation. Social media posts started calling her what she'd always been, but rarely heard out loud: underrated, undercelebrated, a living legend who doesn't get enough credit. Black culture pages and fan accounts began compiling her filmography, her Broadway roots, her Emmy, her decades of showing up and holding it down, framing her not as a footnote, but as a cornerstone. The algorithm started working in her favor for once, younger audiences discovering Waiting to Exhale clips and Grey's Anatomy scenes, and asking the question the industry had avoided for years: why wasn't she bigger? Then Lena Waithe, the writer and producer who'd built her career on platforming Black stories Hollywood ignored, sat Loretta down for legacy talk and gave her the space to say it all out loud. The invisible dream, the sting of being overlooked, the affirmation song she had to make up just to walk into rooms that didn't want her, the grief of watching Dreamgirls go to the movies without her, the joy of still finding work that fed her soul. Waithe treated her like what she was, a living ancestor, a woman whose survival and artistry had carved a path for everyone who came after. And the conversation went viral in the way only truth does. Writers at Blavity and other outlets started placing Loretta in the lineage where she belonged, alongside Missy Elliott, Jill Scott, and Queen Latifah, as part of the generation of plus-size Black women who made fat beauty and talent undeniable on mainstream stages and screens. They pointed to Gloria in Waiting to Exhale as a turning point, to her body love advocacy, to the way she refused to shrink even when the industry demanded it. Her career became a case study in what it costs to be Black, plus-size, and excellent in an industry that only wants one of those things at a time. And Loretta? She kept working, still booking roles, still showing up, still proving that longevity isn't about the machine giving you permission. It's about refusing to let them write you off. Because Loretta Devine's story isn't about falling off. It's about what happens when you refuse to disappear, even when the spotlight was never really yours to begin with.